series of explosions were heard in areas across southern Lebanon. 8 people were killed in the town of al-Dawoodiya. Israeli troops have crossed into Lebanon for the first time in 18 years. Meanwhile, the Israeli Air Force continues its attacks in Lebanon. Among the areas hit was the el-Hilweh camp near the southern city of Sidon. At least 3 people were killed. That is the largest and most densely populated Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. Just before the ground operation began, several Israeli strikes hit the southern suburb of Beirut. At least 4 buildings were destroyed in the area of Dahia, where Israel has been targeting senior Hezbollah figures. Israel's decision to begin a ground operation in southern Lebanon has been described as the UN Secretary General's worst nightmare. Gabriel Elizondo has the latest from the United Nations in New York.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned for months now that any spillover from Israel's war on Gaza into Lebanon would have catastrophic consequences. It was really his worst nightmare that is now being realized.
The Secretary General remains deeply concerned about the humanitarian consequences of the events that are unfolding in Lebanon. He continues to reiterate his call for de-escalation, a cessation of hostilities, and a full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. The Secretary General and his senior staff are in contact with our representatives on the ground, who continue to engage with all actors and all parties to appeal for diplomatic avenues to be given space.
When asked if the Secretary General called on Israel to halt any plans for a ground invasion into Lebanon, the spokesperson was clear and said, "We do not want to see any sort of ground invasion." Gabriel, Al Jazeera at the United Nations in New York.
Let's bring in Paul Morcos. He's a professor of international law at Strasbourg University and president of JUSTICA Legal Foundation, and he's joining us live from Beirut. Thank you for your time. As we've been reporting, we are seeing a lot of the same types of attacks in Lebanon that we have in Gaza, with Israel bombing people's homes. We just mentioned the attack in a town called Dawoodiya, where 10 people were killed after a home was bombed. Attacks on civilians are a violation of international law, right?
This is a breach of the Lebanese sovereignty, and this is also a breach of the international conventions. More specifically, the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the protocols adherent to these conventions, more specifically Protocol 1, that has been issued in 1977, but never been ratified by Israel, unlike the other 4 conventions. This protocol specifically stipulates on the protection of civilians and the distinction between military groups and civilians. This is not being respected when we hit a population or a civilian building while we have doubts of having missiles inside or some military personnel. This is forbidden by international law, since we have to take maximum measures in order to protect civilians, and this is our concern indeed.
Mr. Morcos, you're talking about these attacks being not only a breach of international law, but Lebanese sovereignty. Israel has issued evacuation orders for people in Beirut. Can Israel order citizens of another country to evacuate their homes?
Can you repeat the last part of your question, please?
Yes, so Israel has ordered residents of the southern suburb of Dahia to evacuate their homes following constant attacks there over the last few weeks. Can Israel actually order citizens of another country to evacuate their homes?
Oh, this is a provisional measure. Yes, in principle. But when it comes to a massive population or a massive and obligatory evacuation, it becomes against the humanitarian international law, and specifically Geneva Conventions and the protocols I have listed. So this should be restricted and targeted in order to avoid any massive and obligatory evacuation.
And you mentioned that there is a massive population in Dahia. It is densely populated, and we've seen Israel using really heavy bombs, huge weapons on Dahia, including in the attack that resulted in the death of Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. It is reported that U.S.-supplied weapons were used in these attacks. Does this make the U.S. liable, given that Israel has used U.S. weapons in contravention of international humanitarian law over the past year?
Yes, indeed. Look, there are rules to have a war, to fight. So those rules should not be broken. Even wars have rules. Also, the manufacturer of the weapons, in this case, the United States, has also listed policies and procedures and mechanisms on how to use weapons. It cannot be targeted towards civilians, towards civil buildings, for only having a reason of somebody's being inside. I always give this example when a plane has been kidnapped or even a train. We cannot hit the plane and the whole civilians inside to only target the kidnapper. This is not possible. This is not acceptable in international law, in addition to the rules and ethics on how to use weapons.
Paul Morcos joining us live from Beirut there. Thank you very much for your expertise on this. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get latest news from Al Jazeera.